Good morning and welcome to the Accenture Lounge in Davos, where we're about to have a conversation about data and workers and the trust issue that's so necessary to cement all that together. And we have a great panel, which I'll introduce in a moment. But let me start by saying I don't think there's anyone in the business community today who doesn't understand and accept the fact that we are on the cusp of something very akin to an industrial revolution. And while the past industrial revolutions have been driven by steam, they were driven by electricity, they were driven by computing power, this revolution is going to be driven by data. The ability to collect massive amounts of data from everyone and everything, store it in the cloud, process it through powerful machine learning and AI algorithms, and garner intelligence from it that will help business leaders make decisions and will affect the way that they relate with their customers, the way they relate to their equipment, the way they relate to their supply chains, and most importantly, for the purposes of this conversation, how they relate with their employees. And that's what we're going to talk about today with this incredible panel that Accenture has assembled. Thank you so much. Ellen Shook is the Chief Leadership and Human Resources Officer for Accenture. And we're happy to have you here for this. Anil Bhusri is the CEO of Workday. Anil, good to have you here. And Melanie Kalmar is the Chief Information Officer and Chief Digital Officer of the new Dow. Thank you, all three of you, for being here.
Thank you for being here, Alan.
I love being here. The Accenture Lounge is my favorite place in Davos to hang. You know, you've got good coffee, you've got everything.
The most important things.
Yeah, to keep us going. Ellen, I want to start with you because I know this topic of employee data and trust is something that you've spent some time researching. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit both about the possibilities, the value that lays in that data, and the risks of using that data irresponsibly.
Yeah, so let me just start by saying that trust is the ultimate currency. And almost all leaders understand the value of the mountain of data that they're sitting on. Both workforce data and work data, and that the value can really accelerate growth, improve agility, and really unlock the potential of their people. But frankly, that mountain of data can be a gold mine or a minefield. And I think if I can just start with one fact from the data, the most surprising and perhaps astonishing fact is that while 2/3 of the CEOs that we surveyed said they're already using the data on their people and their workforce, only 1/3 of them really believe that they're using the data responsibly.
How can that be? I mean, so you mean people are saying they're using this data, but they're not happy with the way it's being used?
They're not necessarily not happy, but they're not confident that they're using it responsibly because there are no real frameworks today yet, global frameworks that exist today that really help leaders understand how do you use workforce data in a responsible manner.
I'm going to come back to you in just a minute because I think we should drill down and get some examples, good examples and bad examples of the use of employee data. But I want to go to Anil. Anil, Workday is the method by which much of this data is collected and kept and analyzed. What's your experience with employers in terms of good uses and bad uses and trust and lack of trust?
Well, as you said, Workday was a pioneer in cloud HR systems, and the benefit of that cloud architecture is you can collect all that data on behalf of your customers, and also on an anonymous way look at patterns across multiple customers, which many of our customers want to look at. In 5 years, I think systems like ours will be less about automating business processes and much more about making predictions, and that's where machine learning really kicks in. If you think in general about machine learning, and it's in some ways it's the most overused term and overhyped, and at some level it's underhyped. And the reason is that machines in general are much better at making predictions than humans. Humans have judgment, and if you take a great prediction, apply human judgment against it, you hopefully get to better business outcomes. So there's no question that we're heading down this path. And you take an example like weather. Humans are terrible at predicting weather, but once we know the weather is bad, we're good at taking action and applying judgment. Bring an umbrella. Where it gets dicey is really understanding the ethics of how to use data in a way that is positive for employees. And I think that each company is going to have to hire or build out an ethics officer.
Yeah, because you're talking about very sensitive decisions. I assume the kind of predictions you would rely on that data for is, for instance, of these four, I have a job, a promotion, I have 4 employees who are positioned for that promotion. Which of them will perform best in that job? And the algorithm is going to give me information on that. That's very sensitive information. It affects people's lives and their future.
That's actually, that is an example that hasn't yet materialized. I think that will over time. Right now, it's actually, the examples are much more around predicting which of your top performers might leave.
Yeah.
Based on all the data.
So you can take preemptive action.
Preemptive action.
To keep them,
right? So,
which is in the worker's interest.
Which is in the worker's interest. Career plan. What is the next step you should take based on looking at the data of peers, of your set of skills? What's the next step for you to take in your career? Those are the positive things that we're trying to build in. Where it comes down to choosing individuals, that I do think gets a little dicier, and that's when you really gotta get focused on the ethics of it.
I think, though, to Anil's point, that the way data on people is being used now, starting to be used in a very positive way, because it's not making the decisions for a manager or a leader on who to promote, but it's giving them better insights into their people, the skills that they have, the work that they've done, how they're doing their work. So it's not, I don't think, intended to replace good judgment, but it is bringing forward better insight to elevate people.
Well, all of us are well aware of the high-performing employee who feels like no one's paying attention.
Yeah.
Why aren't they? I'm doing this great work. Why is no one noticing me? You're saying that the data can help you spot that person and jump in proactively and provide the reinforcement you need to keep them happy and engaged and with you.
Absolutely.
When was the last raise for that person? When was the person last promoted? How attractive is that job outside the company? How many times have they connected on LinkedIn in the last few months? You can take all that data, and it'll make a prediction, probability score on how likely that person is to leave in the next 12 months.
Incredibly valuable. As managers, how often have all of us dealt with situations where someone comes to you to inform you they're leaving, and you're shocked and say, "Why? What happened?" And they said, "Well, I did this, this, and this. I didn't hear from you." So that's fascinating. Melanie, you're doing this at the street level. You're trying to see how these things work inside the new Dow. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
I sure can, and great comments and input. At Dow, we're really looking at using the data to improve the employee experience. So not only to help us make better decisions to help the employees, but to help the employees themselves understand their own patterns. If you think about the Office 365 suite and the analytics that you can do to understand, what meetings people are sitting through, who they're interacting with through email. Are they multitasking while they're on, a web meeting? And, they can start using that data themselves to really understand, can I structure my day to be more productive? Because none of us want to be, unproductive or doing work that isn't as productive for ourselves or the company as possible. So great examples that Anil used with Workday. We're in the process of implementing Workday, and we're really looking forward to, providing our employees access to information about jobs that they may not have known if they didn't have that access. So they can find opportunities that suit them, and the managers can help place people or highlight jobs based on the employee skills. But it all comes down to making sure that the right people are accessing that data and you're managing that. And like Ellen said, right now we're operating in an environment where there isn't a real good framework. It is a trust framework with employees and their employees.
And I assume you're walking a fine line. I mean, yes, if you can tell the employee that this data is being used to give them opportunities, to help them do better, to help them advance, to help them get the skills they need to do their jobs better, that's great. But it's a fine line between that and feeling like, geez, they're spying on me, they're watching every move I make, I'm going to get fired because my computer is watching me. How do you stay on the right side of that line?
I think you need to do two things. One, first and foremost, you need to allow them to opt out. And two, but probably more importantly, is you need to engage them in the conversation and show them how by sharing their data, they're going to receive benefits from sharing it.
And I think the key is making sure that the people have access to their own information to do that analysis, and then you anonymize that data as you roll it up and you look across people. But you touched on a really key point, both of you, on transparency. And it's not only transparency in what data you're collecting, but being transparent about how that data is going to be used. And I think we're all kind of working with our HR and our legal departments to make sure the right words are in the application, so the employee
we know how not to
knows.
do it. The financial institutions have taught us how not to do it. You don't give them a 10-page memo
Correct.
and say, check here.
Check here. But you also have to have the mechanism to go back, and when you find different ways to use the data, to be transparent again about, hey, maybe you signed up and you knew we were going to use your data for these 5 reasons, but now we've got to go back and make sure it's okay to use it for a new reason.
Ellen talked about the importance of engaging the workers in these processes. Do you have like a workers' council that is advising you on data policy, or how do you do that?
Well, there's definitely works councils in Europe, here in Europe, that we all work with. But internally, we have named a role that really works across HR, legal, and IT, and the role sits in the IS organization. And that's the role that is really working on building out our framework and how we're gonna do this going forward.
And I would just add, agree completely with what Ellen was talking about and Melanie was talking about. Trust and transparency go hand in hand. And in today's world, if you want to have an engaged set of employees and people that stay with you for a long time and stay loyal to you, you just have to be completely transparent about what you're using the data for. And I think that's where people get themselves in trouble. In Workday, we have a feature called Pulse Surveys, where you can actually pulse employees to say, hey, would you like your data in this format to use for this? And you'll get a quick anonymous sense as to whether this crosses the line of Big Brother where they don't want to, and you completely back off right away. You can't even get close to that.
And do companies do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think right now we're all making it up as we go.
Yeah, there's no best practices.
Yeah.
There's no standard. Ellen said something very interesting about the symmetry of this opportunity and risk.
Yeah.
That the upside is very big, but the downside is also very big. If you get it wrong, you alienate your employees, your most important resource, you start to lose people, you've really blown it. At Workday, you must see both.
Yes, and so, you get asked this question a lot. I'm sure we all get asked it. Is technology good or evil? And the answer is technology is neutral.
Yeah.
It's how you use it.
It's what we do with it.
And we are very focused on delivering use cases for our customers that are only positive use cases. That's it.
Yeah.
There are ones where you could find out data that might lead to someone getting fired. I think that crosses a line where machines are starting to make decisions. I think machines are good at making predictions, but humans have to make the decisions. And so
Very important decision.
very, very important. And humans have the judgment to make those decisions. So if you focus on using it as a source of good, I still think it's going to be very disruptive to, just like the Industrial Revolution was, it's going to be disruptive to the workforce. That'll take time to sort out, but we'll get to better business outcomes as long as we stay true to being transparent and focusing on the good of the technology.
I think another interesting finding in the research is that a third of the leaders we surveyed said they're just staying away from this because they fear
They're afraid of the risk.
They're afraid of the risk,
But they're not
that
missing the
therefore they're
upside.
missing
Yeah.
the upside. So I think this kind of 3-pronged framework that we've come up with is really an easy way and a beginning to enable people to approach the use of the data responsibly and work with their employees in a responsible way.
Is this something you're making publicly available, or do I have to be an Accenture client to take advantage of it?
No, absolutely. We launched our research publicly today, so it's available for everybody to see. And I think it's really interesting because not only did we certainly engage with senior leaders, but we surveyed 10,000 people around the world. And really, trust was the biggest lever in achieving the upside. And about $1 billion of revenue upside was attributed through the employee lens around three things. First was making sure that this transparency existed, like getting permission to use the data. Second was keeping the data secure. So employees expect organizations to keep data they're collecting about them secure and used properly. And third, they want to have open conversations. As Melanie said, like, keep coming back to me, explain to me how you're using the data, if you're changing. And I'll tell you, I had the great fortune yesterday of meeting with 4 of the global shapers here in Davos, and so those are the under 30 set that are really, and they're co-chairing the annual meeting this year. And the consistent theme for them around this issue and trust was the conversation with employers. And so it may sound so simple, but we are seeing, employers feel like they own the data and they don't have to engage with people on how they're going to use the data, but they're going to miss the upside and the consequences are real.
It's a fascinating issue. One of the things that has for the last few years happened here in Davos every year is Richard Edelman has released his trust barometer. And frankly, it's been a pretty depressing report most years, because what it shows is that people's trust in business, trust in government, trust in NGOs, trust in the media, sad to say, has been very, very low. But one of the interesting findings this year is that their trust in their own employer, not business in general, but the person who employs me, is higher. They do start with a reservoir of trust for the company they work for. So you're at least starting from you've got a foot ahead in the race, as long as you get the policies right with your own employees. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. But I think it takes leadership from people like Ellen and Melanie to set the right framework and policies at the company to make sure that the companies are truly good stewards of the data.
Yeah.
And trust is one of those things that it takes a decade to build and you lose it in a nanosecond. And this is an area that I think those companies that are avoiding using the data, they're going to be competitively disadvantaged. That's not the right path. You just have to find a way to do it in the right way.
And you're right, set the right framework and set the right tone at the top, and communicate often about not only how you're using employee data, but the whole cybersecurity side of it and how you're keeping employees' data safe. I think it's important that
it's not going to get out to third parties.
Correct, yeah. The conversation and the communications are really important to not only start with that trust because there's an affiliation of your employer, but continue to have that trust with your employees longer term.
I think something Anil said about the decade long it takes to build the trust. One of the I'm a geek, as you know, so I got up early this morning to read the results of the Edelman Trust Index, and I was reflecting on it, and I thought, a decade ago, people were saying that they trusted their government, they trusted, all organizations, but that trust really in government and in media, sad to say, has eroded over a decade. So employers really need to take a lesson from that while they have earned the trust now, we could lose it very quickly if we're not acting as responsible leaders.
Another interesting data point in the survey was that people are really increasing their expectations of business leaders and CEOs in particular. And I think a lot of this is driven by the millennial generation. There's a lot of research that shows that millennials are less likely to join organized religion, less likely to join clubs, slower to get married than previous generations. And therefore, the employer becomes their most important formal contact with society. And so there's a lot of hope and expectation and put into those employers. And they're looking to their employers not just to treat them well, but to address important societal issues like equal pay and bias and training, which is something we should talk about. So how does that play into this data trust issue?
If I can share an example of something we're doing here at Accenture, we've set a very ambitious goal to be a gender balanced workforce by 2025. So we have started hiring and employing a lot of women. I think we're approaching 200,000 women now at Accenture. And in India, we transport our people back and forth to work. And so our women trust us to provide them with safe driving back and forth to work. It's a big workforce issue. It's a big societal issue. And so our team, our blockchain team, actually created something called Safe Drive. And what it does is it puts the credentials of the driver into a blockchain, into a digital wallet. And it enables us to ensure that our women are safe, but what it's done for the drivers is it's given them their credentials in a digital wallet so that it's theirs. And they have to update it every 6 months so it's fresh. So it gives our women confidence in us, trust in us that we're providing them with safe transportation, but it's also given the drivers a new credential that they can use with us or they could take to other employers. And it's really a win-win but they're sharing a lot of data with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've taken a page out of your book of trying to be a great place to work for all. I think that last piece, for all, is really critical. And we've partnered with the Great Place to Work Institute, your partner, Michael Bush, and try to understand how you really are a great place for women, for minorities, for diversity, for millennials. And each of them have a different set of requirements. Millennials want to be at a company that is giving back to the community. With women, we have half of our management team as women. So we're in a top 10 company, and we're proud of that, but most importantly, we get
top
the
10 on the Fortune Best Places to Work.
Best places to work, and on each one of those.
Yeah,
Diversity
in each of
those individual categories, because that's the only way to be a great place to work for all. And the most important part of that survey is actually the data that you get, and use that data to make yourself better.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and part of our ambition with the new Dow is to be very inclusive, and we've launched 10 employee resource groups, or ERGs. We've had several of those for several years, but we have a couple new ones. I actually have the honor to lead our Prime group, which is 50 and above. But again,
We don't have a Prime group.
we just
I'm in
launched
favor of
Prime.
Prime groups.
And we
I like Prime groups.
We launched Rise as well, which is for our new employees that have been with the company 8 years or less. And the two ERGs work very well together in mentoring. But bringing that up and talking about the data and trust, one of the examples that we've recently come across, which has been a challenge, is we put together a nice mobile app to allow people to self-nominate to these employee resource groups. And it's interesting, as we got further into it, how complex it was just to create an app to allow people to sign up, because you're capturing information about their affiliations and whether it's their race or their gender or their depending on the ERG that they're joining. So we've had some pretty complex conversations with legal and with HR, and we're now signing up participants instead of members to get around that. So you're not pinpointing people in certain groups, but it comes full circle back to this data and trust challenge with the inclusive side of what we're trying to do in our company.
So let me, I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
I would just add that I think actually employees need to take ownership of part of this question in front of us. And they need to understand how their data is being used, and need to understand at a granular level which of the places they're giving their data is being used in the wrong way, and which are being used in the right way. If you look at vendors like Salesforce and Workday, we are paid to protect data. Some of the consumer internet players are selling your data. They somehow get lumped together, and people think, oh, my data is at risk, or my data is being used inappropriately. The employee really needs to get smart on this topic and be really granular.
But isn't part of the problem here is that every employee may have different preferences? I mean, some people don't care. You can have all my data. You can track me all day long, and give some of it back and help me. And other people are super protective. I don't want you to know what I'm doing during my lunch break.
As long as you're educated how the data is being used. I think a lot of people have been surprised how their data was used in some of the consumer internet situations where they didn't know their data was being used in that way. I don't think in the corporate setting that should happen. The employee should be really
I
knowledgeable.
mean, that should be a hard rule, right?
But that has made it tougher for all of us too, the experience
Because
in the
people
consumer
think
world.
that you're going to sell your employees' data to outside sources.
Or they're not sure how you're going to use it.
How you're gonna
and,
use
Yeah.
it.
and back to being transparent about that.
And two-thirds of the people we surveyed did say that they are willing to have their employer not just collect the data they have, but collect even more data on them if there's benefit. And so I do think employees have a responsibility. And it sounds like Melanie and Dow are doing the same thing. We make the data that we're collecting on our people transparent to them. And not only can they go in and see their data, but they can correct their data if they think it's wrong. And for us, it's important because one of the things we collect on our data, on our people, is their skills data, what kind of skills they have, which is essential to their career. And we collect that data through lots of different systems. And if we miss an important assignment that they've had or the recency of a skill, it could affect their ability to continue successful careers.
So, Ellen, you said 2/3 of the people you surveyed are willing to have data collected and more data collected as long as they feel like it's being used in a responsible
And there's
way
benefit to
and
them.
they have clear benefit.
Yep.
But that still leaves 1/3 of the workforce who doesn't want their data collected. How do you deal with those people? You can't just cut them out of the processes, can you, Melanie? I mean, what do you do for the and maybe it's less than 1/3, but for the malcontents, the people who say, I don't want you to be spying on me, I don't want you to have any of this data?
Yeah, you have to have process to handle both situations because you are going to have people that don't want to follow maybe the new mainstream of having transparent data. So you're never going to get rid of your kind of face-to-face HR interactions if we're talking about people data. But to Ellen's point, I mean, at some point, being able to mine the skills and make sure you get people on project assignments with the right background and capability. I mean, that's what we're looking
that's very
for
valuable.
to help us
That's
be
very valuable.
much
But
more agile.
Anil, Ellen started this conversation talking about opt-in and opt-out
Oh.
arrangements. What do you do with the employees who want to opt out? I mean, can you allow employees to opt out?
Yes,
You need
you
this
have
data.
to.
You have to. But what you have to do, what Ellen said earlier, is you have to give them something in return, and make that something in return valuable enough that over
they'll
time
do it.
they'll opt in. And-
So it could be the opportunity for promotion, the opportunity for new skills.
Probably less promotion, because I do think that's again the machine making a decision. But if you're using the system for predicting the next job that person might take, looking at a career plan, well, you benefit from opting in. You might get a whole bunch of better ideas about what the next step is in your career than if you don't. So you really have to give something back to the employee to opt in. And I do think that the millennial generation, frankly, is much more comfortable opting in than the prime group, our group.
So I'd like to end the conversation. I'd like to end the conversation by asking each of you. You've implied it in a lot of your answers, but I want to be very explicit for the people who are watching this and who are trying to understand how to deal with these problems themselves in their own business. I'd like sort of your top 2 pieces of advice to any company that's struggling with how to use employee data properly. What are the 2 things you really want them to take away from this conversation? And Melanie, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'll start with, you have to be transparent with what you're going to do with the information so they feel comfortable knowing how their information is going to be used. But I think the other piece of advice I would give is you have to have the right leadership roles in place who are overseeing, how you're handling, what your framework is and how you're handling employee data going forward.
So transparency and a clear leadership responsibility and accountability.
Yes.
Anil, two pieces of advice.
You have to leap in. If you don't leap in as an employer, you're going to be behind and competitively disadvantaged because all of your peers are going to be using the data to
So
make
this
better
is
decisions.
not a nice to have.
This is not nice to have. I think in 5 years, this will be the way that business decisions will likely get driven. Machines make predictions, humans then make judgments against those predictions. So number 1, you have to do it. Number 2, picking up what Melanie said, I think it's really critical to put a lot of time and effort into that framework, the ethics framework up front, and really make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, using technology in ways that further your employees' interests, and it has to start with the leadership.
So be proactive. Don't wait for the problems to arise and then rush to address
Correct.
them. You need to get in front of them.
Yeah, and iterate, because you're not going to get it right up front. And look for employee feedback to make that framework better and better over
Great
time.
advice. Ellen, you get the final word because it's your lounge and it's your show, and we're here
And the
as your
good
guest.
coffee and the, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It is a great lounge. I gotta
it is.
Good location too, by the way.
Well, I do think Melanie and Anil hit the key points, but I think I'll just add that having ongoing conversations with your people, I mean, your people want to engage in this, and we saw that employees are really thinking about this now, and the context that we're living in with the consumer data issues is really giving us an opportunity to take a different approach, include the employees, include them often. And then I think, certainly having there be broad accountability, leadership accountability for responsible use of data, but I really think you need to have an accountable leader in the C-suite that's corralling the coalition and ensuring that the employees are coming in. So one accountable leader.
Yep. Good. Thank you. Great discussion. Thanks very much for doing it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.